Black Stallion by Walter Farley. Illustrations by Robert Barrett. After being caught in a terrifying shipwreck, Alec Ramsey is pulled safely to shore by a wild black stallion that was also aboard the ship. They are the only two survivors, and they are stranded on a deserted island with only a seaweed-like plant called carrageen and the occasional fish to keep them from starving. Alec has been working hard to gain the horse's trust and to help the proud, frightened animal understand that in order to survive, the two of them must rely on each other and work together. The next day, Alec set out to obtain more of the carrageen. As he neared the rocks, he saw the stallion standing silently beside a huge boulder. Not a muscle twitched in his black body. It was as if an artist had painted the black on white stone. Alec climbed down into a small hollow and paused to look out over the rocks below. Suddenly, he heard the stallion scream, more piercing, more blood-curdling than he had ever heard it before. He looked up. The black was on his hind legs, his teeth bared. Then with a mighty leap, he shot away from the boulder toward Alec. Swiftly he came, faster with every magnificent stride. He was almost on top of it when he thundered to a halt and reared again. Alec jumped to the side, tripped on a stone, and fell to the ground. High above him, the black's legs pawed the air, and then descended 3 yards in front of him. Again he went up and down. Again and again he pounded. The ground in which Alec lay shook from the force of his hoofs. The stallion's eyes never left the ground in front of him. Gradually, his pounding lessened and then stopped. He raised his head high, and his whistle shrilled through the air. He shook his head and slowly moved away, his nostrils trembling. Alec regained his feet and cautiously made his way toward the torn earth. His brain flooded with confusion. There in front of him, he saw the strewn parts of a long, yellowish-black body and the venomous head of a snake, crushed and lifeless. He stood still. The suddenness of discovering life, other than the black and himself on the island, astounding him. Sweat broke out on his forehead as he realized what a poisonous snakebite would have meant: suffering and perhaps death. Dazed, he looked at the stallion just a few feet away. Had the black killed the snake to save him? Was the stallion beginning to understand that they needed each other to survive? Slowly, the boy walked toward the black. The stallion's mane swept in the wind. His muscles twitched. His eyes moved restlessly, but he stood his ground as the boy approached. Alec wanted the horse to understand that he would not hurt him. Cautiously, he reached a hand toward the stallion's head. The black drew it back as far as he could without moving. Alec stepped closer and to the side of him. Gently, he touched him for an instant. The stallion did not move. Again, Alec attempted to touch the savage head. The black reared and shook a little. Alec said soothingly, "Steady, black fellow. I wouldn't hurt you." The stallion quivered, then reared again and broke. 100 yards away, he suddenly stopped and turned. Alec gazed at him, standing there so still, his head raised high in the air. "We'll get out of this somehow, Black, working together," he said determinedly. Alec walked back to the top of the rocks and again began his descent. He made his way carefully down to the water level. Cautiously, he looked before he stepped. Where there was one snake, there might be more. Reaching the bottom, he once again filled his shirt full of the moss and made his way back. High above him, he could see the black looking out over the cliffs, his mane whipping in the wind. When he reached the top, the stallion was still there. He followed a short distance behind as Alec went back to the spring. Days passed, and gradually the friendship between the boy and the black grew. The stallion now came at his call and let Alec stroke him while he grazed. One night, Alec sat within the warm glow of the fire and watched the stallion munching on the carrageen beside the pool. He wondered if the stallion was as tired of the carrageen as he. Alec had found that if he boiled it in the turtle shell, it formed a gelatinous substance, which tasted a little better than the raw moss. A fish was now a rare delicacy to him. The flame's shadows reached out and cast eerie ghost-like patterns on the black's body. Alec's face became grim as thoughts rushed through his brain. Should he try it tomorrow? Did he dare attempt to ride the black? Should he wait a few more days? Go ahead, tomorrow. Don't do it. Go ahead. The fire burned low, then smoldered. Yet Alec sat beside the fire, his eyes fixed on that blacker-than-night figure beside the spring. The next morning he woke from a fitful slumber to find the sun high above. Hurriedly, he ate some of the carrageen. Then he looked for the black, but he was not in sight. Alec whistled, but no answer came. He walked toward the hill. The sun blazed down, and the sweat ran from his body. If it would only rain. The last week had been like an oven on the island. When he reached the top of the hill, he saw the black at one end of the beach. Again he whistled, and this time there was an answering whistle as the stallion turned his head. Alec walked up the beach toward him. The black stood still as he approached. He went cautiously up to him and placed a hand on his neck. Steady, he murmured, as the warm skin quivered slightly beneath his hand. The stallion showed neither fear nor hate of him. His large eyes were still turned toward the sea. For a moment, Alec stood with his hand on the black's neck. Then he walked toward a sand dune a short distance away. The stallion followed. He stepped up the side of the dune, his left hand in the horse's thick mane. The black's ears pricked forward. His eyes followed the boy nervously. Some of the savageness returned to them. His muscles twitched. For a moment, Alec was undecided what to do. Then his hands gripped the mane tighter, and he threw himself on the black's back. For a second, the stallion stood motionless. Then he snorted and plunged. The sand went flying as he doubled in the air. Alec felt the mighty muscles heave, and he was flung through the air, landing heavily on his back. Everything went dark. Alec regained consciousness to find something warm against his cheek. Slowly, he opened his eyes. The stallion was pushing him with his head. Alec tried moving his arms and legs and found them bruised but not broken. Wearily, he got to his feet. The wildness and savageness had once more disappeared in the black. He looked as though nothing had happened. Alec waited for a few minutes, then once again led the stallion to the sand dune. His hand grasped the horse's mane, but this time he laid only the upper part of his body on the stallion's back, while he talked soothingly into his ear. The black flirted his ears back and forth as he glanced backward with his dark eyes. See, I'm not going to hurt you, Alec murmured, knowing it was he who might be hurt. After a few minutes, Alec cautiously slid onto his back. Once again, the stallion snorted and sent the boy flying through the air. Alec picked himself up from the ground, slower this time. But when he had rested, he whistled for the Black again. The stallion moved toward him. Alec determinedly stepped on the sand dune and once again let the Black feel his weight. Gently he spoke into a large ear. "It's me. I'm not much to carry." He slid onto the stallion's back. One arm slipped around the Black's neck as he half-reared. Then, like a shot from a gun, the Black broke down the beach. His action shifted, and his huge stride seemed to make him fly through the air. Alec clung to the stallion's mane for his life. The wind screamed by, and he couldn't see. Suddenly, the Black swerved and headed up the sand dune. He reached the top and then down. The spring was a blur as they whipped by. To the rocks he raced, and then the stallion made a wide circle, his speed never diminishing. Down through a long ravine he rushed. Alec's blurred vision made out a black object in front of him. And as a flash, he remembered the deep gully that was there. He felt the stallion gather himself. Instinctively, he leaned forward and held the Black firm and steady with his hands and knees. Then they were in the air, sailing over the black hole. Alec almost lost his balance when they landed, but recovered himself in time to keep from falling off. Once again, the stallion reached the beach, his hoofbeats regular and rhythmic on the white sand. The jump had helped greatly in clearing Alec's mind. He leaned closer to the stallion's ear and kept repeating, "Easy, Black, easy." The stallion seemed to glide over the sand, and then his speed began to lessen. Alec kept talking to him. Slower and slower ran the Black. Gradually, he came to a stop. The boy released his grip from the stallion's mane, and his arms encircled the Black's neck. He was weak with exhaustion, in no condition for such a ride. Wearily, he slipped to the ground. Never had he dreamed a horse could run so fast. The stallion looked at him, his head held high, his large body only slightly covered with sweat. That night, Alec lay wide awake, his body aching with pain, but his heart pounding with excitement. He had ridden the Black. He had conquered this wild, unbroken stallion with kindness. He felt sure from that day on the Black was his alone. But for what? Would they ever be rescued? Would he ever see his home again? Alec shook his head. He had promised himself he wouldn't think of that anymore. The next day he mounted the Black again. The horse half-reared, but didn't fight him. Alec spoke softly in his ear, and the Black stood still. Then Alec touched him lightly on the side, and he walked, a long, loping stride. Far up the beach they went. Then Alec tried to turn him by shifting his weight and gently pushing the stallion's head. Gradually, the horse turned. Alec took a firmer grip on his long mane and pressed his knees tighter against the large body. The stallion broke out of his walk into a fast canter. The wind blew his mane back into the boy's face. The stallion's stride was effortless, and Alec found it easy to ride. Halfway down the beach, he managed to bring him back again to a walk, then to a complete stop. Slowly, he turned him to the right, then to the left, and then around in a circle. Long but exciting hours passed as Alec tried to make the Black understand what he wanted him to do. The sun was going down rapidly when he walked the stallion to the end of the beach. The Black turned and stood still. A mile of smooth white sand stretched before them. Suddenly, the stallion bolted, almost throwing Alec to the ground. He picked up speed with amazing swiftness. Faster and faster he went. Alec hung low over his neck, his breath coming in gasps. Down the beach, the stallion thundered. Tears from the wind rolled down Alex's cheeks. 3/4 of the way, he tried to check the Black's speed. He pulled back on the flowing mane. "Whoa, Black," he yelled, but his words were whipped away in the wind. Swiftly, the stallion neared the end of the beach, and Alec thought that his breathtaking ride of yesterday was to be repeated. He pulled back harder on the mane. Suddenly, the black's pace lessened. Alec flung one arm around the stallion's neck. The black shifted into his fast trot, which gradually became slower and slower until Alec had him under control. Overjoyed, he turned him and rode him over the hill to the spring. Together, they drank the cool, refreshing water. With the days that followed, Alec's mastery over the black grew greater and greater. He could do almost anything with him. The savage fury of the unbroken stallion disappeared when he saw the boy. Alec rode him around the island and raced him down the beach, marveling at the giant strides and the terrific speed. Without realizing it, Alec was improving his horsemanship until he had reached the point where he was almost a part of the black as they tore along.